So good to have you join us today on this edition of Business Daily. I'm Lee Ji-yoon in Seoul. Let's first get started by taking a look at the day's highlights. Is GDP a credible measurement of a country's economic growth and welfare? We'll sit down with an expert to talk about the debate surrounding the reliability of this key indicator. Hyundai Motor Group unveils its own Ironman suit, a wearable robot prototype that gives you extra strength to lift objects that weigh hundreds of kilograms. These stories and more coming right up. But first, we're seeing fresh highs again in Korea's household debt, despite government measures to slam the brakes on snowballing debt growth. What's worse is that efforts to limit debt levels are actually adding to the burden of low-income earners. Our Hwang Jae starts us off.
Korea's household debt, including sales on credit, has hit yet another record high. The Bank of Korea says the amount stood at around 1,224 trillion won, or slightly over $1 trillion as of the end of the first quarter. That's the largest amount logged since related data was first run in 2002. For first quarter figures, the amount grew at the fastest pace on record, jumping roughly $17.5 billion from the end of last year, but the pace of growth slowed significantly compared to the fourth quarter. Experts say it's natural that debt gains weakened, as the amount that increased in the last 3 months of last year was overly excessive. The government had warned it would tighten guidelines on screening loan applicants, measures that kicked in this February, encouraging more people who were looking to borrow to turn to banks a lot earlier. What's more worrisome is that the quality of debt is worsening.
As banks tightened guidelines on mortgages, debt pressure was transferred to the non-banking sector, especially among those with low incomes and low credit.
Of the $17.5 billion increase in the first quarter, over two-thirds of the loans came from the non-banking sector. And keeping those debt levels in check are considered crucial, as the interest rates are much higher, adding further to the existing debt pile. So economists say the greater concern for now is not the possibility of bad loans prompting a financial crisis, but the significant dent that soaring debt would put in already fragile household spending power. Hwang Jae, Business Daily.
Korea's consumer sentiment dropped this month, breaking a 2-month climb posted since March. The Bank of Korea says the consumer sentiment index came in at 99 in May, down 2 points from last month. A reading under 100 indicates that pessimism outweighs optimism. The central bank attributes the drop to the government's ongoing corporate restructuring drive that has darkened consumers' outlook. Large-scale layoffs are expected once restructuring is in full swing, especially in the country's ailing shipping and shipbuilding industries. The monthly index reflects the overall economic outlook of consumers, their living conditions, and future spending plans. Global trade in the first quarter of this year has retreated to levels seen 6 years ago. According to the World Trade Organization, the amount of trade among 71 countries came to roughly $6.94 trillion in the January to March period. Now, that's down almost 8% from last year and marks the first time since 2010 that the first quarter figure has fallen to the $6 billion range. The decline is attributed to low demand stemming from slow global growth, as well as faltering commodity prices. Despite its exports being on a downward trend, China was the world's largest exporter, followed by the United States and Japan. Korea ranked 7th, down 1 notch from last year. Korea's top central banker on Wednesday said the BOK will develop alternatives to measure the country's gross domestic product, or GDP, in line with the changing landscape of global industries. Now, ever since the concept of GDP was first developed back in the 1930s, it has been used as one of the main barometers to measure economic growth. But now there's growing global debate over whether GDP numbers are credible. Take a look.
A country's GDP is a major indicator that's used to measure the size of its economy as well as the pace of growth. But back in January at the World Economic Forum in Davos, leading economists and academics asked this question: is GDP a good measure of economic performance? Many agreed it's not, and that GDP is a poor way to assess the health of economies, suggesting the global economy is in need of a new indicator. In fact, GDP in the US has gone up every year except in 2009, but according to economist Joseph Stiglitz, most Americans feel they're worse off than they were 30 years ago, and real wages adjusted for today are lower than they were 6 decades ago. In 2014, Nigeria became the largest economy in Africa after economists adjusted the way they calculate GDP, revising up the country's gross domestic product for 2013 by 89%. The same thing happened in Ghana back in 2010, with its GDP shooting up more than 60% after a statistical rebasing of the economy. So facing the shortcomings of GDP as a measure of the economy, there are now growing calls for a new indicator of growth.
And to tell us more about this, we have Professor Kim Se-won from Ewha Women's University joining us in the studio today. So good to see you, Professor.
Great to be here.
All right, so it's true that we pay a massive amount of attention to GDP forecasts because, we do pay a lot of attention to like even 0.1 percentage point or 0.2 percentage point revisions, and it means a lot to respective economies. So let's go back to how GDP is measured and how we have been using it.
Well, the GDP is the most important and famous economic variables that represents economy-wide activities. But there has been a big problem in calculating GDP, and that is well known these days. And that has been such a big hot potato between economists. So we are looking for a way to fix the problem. And also, GDP in Korea is like a very important figure compared to other countries.
Now, although we do use GDP to measure the performance of the economy, I'm sure it comes with a lot of limitations. Can you tell us more about that?
Well, GDP does not include something very important services like mom's cooking and military services and volunteer work. And in addition, it only includes something legally traded goods and services. So these are not fully reflect the economic activities these days.
Now, going along with that, economists point out that new technologies and other business models are not actually factored into GDP and its productivity numbers. Therefore, the indicator is not really an accurate measurement of growth or let alone welfare.
Right. The IT and service products are not appropriately priced in the market. Therefore, we believe that we do not pay the right prices for these products. So as the IT and service parts are more important, traditional way of GDP is not representative.
Now, there have also been doubts over the accuracy of GDP figures because in some cases, even their objectivity because they are released by the government. And of course, China has often been cited in this regard, right?
Right. In the early stages of GDP calculation, we have so many errors in collecting price and quantities. But for the case of China, there has been something credibility problems. So even Chinese government recognized that problems. So in 2016, Chinese government fired the statistics office directors.
Oh, wow. Now, earlier this year, though, Britain-based consulting firm World Economics ranked Korea 31st out of 154 countries in terms of GDP credibility. So what can we make out of this?
Well, actually, I do not agree with World Economics report. It is kind of well-known fact that Korean governments and central banks provide user-friendly and very scientifically calculated GDP data. So they provide a well-organized platform for macroeconomic data.
So you believe that Korea should be ranked higher?
Exactly.
Than 31st.
Exactly.
Where are you thinking around?
Well, it is actually this is what we say between the international economists. Korea is one of the best data archives given by Korean government.
All right. Well, the Bank of Korea chief also said, like we heard in the report, that the bank will try to come up with a better method to calculate GDP. Now, what are some of the concerns that the Bank of Korea chief raised in regards to the current method of calculating GDP?
Well, as of today, the GDP from IT and service sector covers almost 60% of the Korean GDP. But as Korean economy develops further, the size of the GDP from these two industries will be increased up to 80%, like that of the US and European countries. So as time goes by, the accuracy of the GDP will be lessened. So we have to have a more developed and more modified GDP calculation. Actually, that case reminds us the case of the French new development of the GDP calculation. In 2008, France President Sarkozy developed their own GDP calculations, but that only emphasized the role of the importance of the life quality factors like leisures and have time with families, etc.
All right. Well, then what alternatives or adjustments do you think the BOK will look into?
Well, as I explained before, we need to have our own way to include the products of the IT and service products. And we have to include also more life quality factors like length of the leisure, summer vacations, etc.
All right. Thank you so much for coming in today, Professor.
Thank you very much.
One of the goals of President Park Geun-hye's visit to Africa is promoting Korea as a development partner through the provision of economic and social assistance. And to that end, the president will oversee the launch of a new program called Korea Aid during her trip. Our Lee Eun-shin has more.
During her visit to Africa this week, President Park is unveiling a new government initiative called Korea Aid. That's part humanitarian project, part development cooperation strategy. The program, developed by the Ministries of Foreign Affairs, Culture, Health, and Agriculture, is part of Korea's contribution of Official Development Assistance, or ODA, to Africa. Through the program, Korea will provide food, medical assistance, and cultural content to the 3 African countries the president is visiting on her trip: Ethiopia, Uganda, and Kenya. President Park will launch the program at Addis Ababa University on Saturday in Ethiopia. Another launch event will be held Monday and Tuesday at Adama Science and Technology University, where nearly 1,600 area residents and college students are expected to attend. The goal of the program is to help area residents become self-reliant. The program will especially focus on providing medical services, supplies, and training to supplement the healthcare systems in each country. A secondary goal is to make the services easily accessible to people in need, so that, as the program's slogan says, no one is left behind. To that end, all of the supplies and services will be mobile. The caravan includes 1 mobile health clinic, 2 ambulances, 4 trucks carrying food and related supplies, an entertainment truck equipped with a wide screen to display cultural and educational videos, and 2 SUVs for administrative personnel. The Foreign Ministry, which announced the program on Wednesday, said the program will continue for the next 2 years. The ministry also said, however, the collaborative and supervising efforts from Korea will continue even after that, in order to extend Korea's aid contribution and help spread Korean culture. Lee Eun-shin, Business Daily.
Nearly 300,000 foreigners came to Korea for medical purposes last year, posting an 11% jump on year, in spite of factors like the MERS outbreak and low oil prices that were feared to reduce demand from commodity-dependent markets. According to the Ministry of Health and Welfare, Chinese patients took up about a third of the total, followed by those from the U.S., Russia, and Japan. Korea also saw a huge surge in patients from Central Asian countries like Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan, as well as from Vietnam. In terms of revenue, the country raked in roughly $565 million, which is a 20% jump from the previous year. A third of it came from plastic surgery and dermatology clinics. Now, the number of foreign patients has increased by roughly 30% every year since 2009, reaching an aggregate 1.2 million as of last year. We might be inching one step closer to robotic bodysuits that can actually put people on par with their favorite superheroes. Now, although these wearable robots don't come with flying capabilities, at least not yet, Hyundai Motor Group's latest prototype shows that we're on track to seeing a revolution in this field. Our Lee Ju-young takes a closer look.
After years of development and secrecy, the nation's largest automotive company, Hyundai Motor Group, unveiled its latest wearable robot technology that's been dubbed the Ironman suit. In line with the company's vision of realizing free movement of people and things, the cutting-edge prototype suit grants the average Joe super strength abilities. Hyundai says the suits can significantly increase the productivity of workers and lower the likelihood of accidents when lifting objects weighing hundreds of kilograms. There are also other suits that cater to the defense industry, enabling soldiers to travel long distances without being worn out by heavy gear. Hyundai adds its robots can also help the elderly and give new hope to paraplegics in walking independently.
To help the people walk while going upstairs and downstairs, and just for the better life quality.
Other global players, including Panasonic, BMW, and Audi, are also developing robotic exoskeletons of their own to nab a piece of the market that's forecast to grow to roughly $1.6 billion in 2025.
Companies see wearable robots as offering great potential in various ways, ranging from industrial use to professional and home services.
Hyundai aims to commercialize these wearable robots, but it has so far kept a tight lid on when exactly the Iron Man dream will become a part of reality for consumers. Lee Ju-young, Business Daily.
And that brings us to the end. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll be back tomorrow at the same time, same place for your Business Daily. Until then, goodbye.